Wrapping up the New York Auto Show and the World Car Awards for 2023, and Hyundai, Kia, they have practically swept the awards. Kia, in fact, they won the Performance Car of the Year with the Kia EV9 GT. However, when you get an award like this, how do you follow that up? Well, you could go to Disneyland, but if you're a car company, that could be hard. So perhaps even harder would be making an EV you actually make money on, and that would be a 3-row crossover. Okay, so we know it's an electric 3-row crossover. They call it the EV9, but don't confuse it with the Telluride, because it's not just an electric version of a Telluride, and there's a very specific reason for that. Look at the size of it. One would see it in video, one would see it in pictures, and think it's much bigger than a Telluride, but you see it in person, and it actually is perception-wise smaller. But in reality, the wheelbase is significantly longer. Put a completely different way, the wheelbase, where you package a lot of people and a lot of dogs, that is the size of a Mercedes-Benz S-Class. And that brings us to the business of this being an EV. Now, it is somewhat related to the car that just won World Performance Car of the Year, the EV9 GT, in that it's based on the same platform. So that means a lot of the same architecture, the battery, the motors, most importantly, the 800-volt architecture, which means charging is fast here. You can go from 10 to 80% in the EV9 GT at about 18 minutes. There hasn't been quoted times here because the batteries change on this one. This, unlike the EV6, has 2 different batteries on offer. The standard range battery is 76.1 kilowatt hours, and then there's the long range battery, which is 99.8 kilowatt hours. Now, the US EPA, they haven't rated the vehicle yet, but it's somewhere between 279 miles for the all-wheel drive and 300 for the 2-wheel drive, meaning rear-wheel drive. And for the avoidance of doubt, that's the estimate from the manufacturer. Now, before we press on, yes, there is some practicality in the front with a very small frunk. However, as you can see, this one is in auto show mode, so you and I will have to discuss this when we drive the vehicle. Then there's the design. And here you can see there's definitely an influence from the Telluride, but I never like to tell you what you guys can see. What they've done here is gone with this boxy theme, but then they've added this geometric shape to it. Like the fender has some width to it. The quarter panel in the back also has some width to it, where it's almost like, I hate to say this for an electric crossover, but it's somewhat pornographic because there's haunches in a vehicle that frankly is supposed to be very practical. Then they do something really interesting with a D-pillar down here. The quarter panel extends higher and creates this triangle space here, and then there's this line of delineation that is the trim piece, which surrounds the daylight opening and changes the look of the vehicle completely. Here is where the vehicle is completely successful. Where the design is not very successful, the wheels. Granted, beauty is in the eye of the beholder, but here, remember the wheels from the 1987 to like 89 Pontiac Bonneville SSEI? Well, they've been reincarnated here. And then remember the wheels from like the Grand Am SE? They're over here on this different version with like triangle in the center. I see what they were going for to try to make it look geometric like the body of the car, but this is something that needs to change because otherwise it is exquisitely beautiful to look at in a very different way. Now, personal preferences of wheels aside, they are on offer in 2 different sizes. There's the 19s and the 21s, and yes, that does impact the range and probably makes up the 20 miles delta in range between the all-wheel drive and the 2-wheel drive. Then there's the towing, because after all, this is a crossover. That's some of the benefit of having 516 pounds of torque in the all-wheel drive. Here it can tow up to 5,000 pounds. Then there's the business of it being a crossover, and that is the daily use on the inside. Inside, they got a lot of moving parts here, all to do with the extra space. And they have some novel applications of the extra space. Like, for example, you look here and you see this has the captain's chairs. It is going to be on offer with a bench seat as well. However, with the captain's chairs, they have a swivel function where they can turn around and you can face the third row, kind of like the old Volkswagen buses. However, there's a huge hinweis there that is only on offer in other markets, not in the US, because we have these things called lawyers' something about safety. So in the US, they only go this way. Then they add this leg rest, kind of like we saw in the Ioniq 5 with the charging, and they do that with a front seat as well. Then there's the very annoying business of me having to go back here. And this, not as roomy as the Defender 130 or even that Mazda CX-90 we just drove here. Now granted, this seat's kind of in a ridiculous position here. I'm sure I could get my legs behind there, but really these seats, they are for children. Then they've got an interesting party trick from that extra 7 inches we talked about. You see the space here? That's where the 7 inches pays dividends. The seat goes forward and allows for 7 inches of space to crawl out from the back seat. But wait, there's more on the inside. Now oddly, all of that extra space we've been discussing, you notice it more in the front than you do in the rear of the vehicle. And it's not just the actual size, it's some of the design theme. I had the opportunity to talk to the chief interior designer of Kia, Jochen, great dude, came from BMW, like Kareem, who runs design for Kia. And he talked about some of the themes that they've done here. Notice you have a lot of horizontal lines, and not just in the dash, you have it on the side of the console. And what that does is it reinforces the extra space. Then they make it significantly fancier. Like for example, they've got this unique touch material here where the application buttons are touch sensitive or haptic feedback. I personally would want toggle switches, that kind of stuff. But there, they actually placate people like me that want to focus on safety, where the temperature, the fan, mode buttons, they've got these chunky toggle switches, very nice touch. Then there's more reliance on the steering wheel controls as well. And then remember the gear changer on the Ioniq 5 and Ioniq 6. They've kind of copied it here in Kia, but they've gone a step further in that the start button, the power button of the vehicle, is contained within the base of that shifter. Then some of the material, like the tactile feel, is unique. Then moving farther down inside the cabin, that's where the tactile feel takes a little bit of a hit. There, let's put a pin in that discussion and pick it up when we drive the vehicle, because this is a very early pre-production prototype. Then there are the screens, and notice it looks like one screen like there is in the EV6, but in the EV6 technically it's 2 screens. Here, this is not 2 screens, this is 3 screens. It's a little over 12 here, a little over 12 here, and then 5 here. Then they have some other, I would say, party tricks. Like this, you see the application buttons we talked about? This lights up as you get closer to it. And then something interesting they do with the lighting, the Kia logo, that lights up when you're driving the vehicle. Then another really interesting touch in this, I would argue, is on the side of safety as well as design. Notice it's got a volume knob. You don't have to use some sort of like haptic feedback. This is a frequent item, so someone clearly has been listening to my episodes before. Then we have to go back outside. Now there is one more piece of practicality business we need to discuss, and that is the storage. Back here with all 3 rows up, it's 20.2 cubic feet of storage. With 2 rows down, it's up to 81.9 cubic feet of storage. Then there's the business of performance. I know that's an unusual discussion for A, crossover, and B, something that's this big, and C, something that's electric. Well, in reality, this is going to be somewhat quick. The manufacturer claims 5 seconds to 60. That is something you and I will have to discuss when we drive the vehicle. Now, huge point of information here. This is going to be made in Korea for the first 12 months. I bring this up because they've made a lot of news, Kia, in that they're coming out with a new factory. They're bringing one online in Georgia that's in addition to the one they have in West Point, Georgia. But this one, after the first 12 months of production, that's going to be produced here in the US. Now that brings us to the wish list, and here you know where I'm going to go with this, dollars and cents. If you look at an EV6 or an Ioniq 5, they're the better part of $50,000. The one that just won World Car of the Year, Performance Car of the Year, that's $61,000. So you know this is going to be at least $60,000. I would argue the vehicle we're looking at here, the fancy one, probably the better part of $80,000 US. So my wish list here is, I know this is asking a lot, because these vehicles, there really isn't a lot of play in changing pricing because the R&D hasn't been paid off for electric vehicles. All of the bits that go into the batteries, all very expensive. But with that, I'm still going to ask for the first number on this one to be a 5. And ideally, not the second number being a 9, because that's just too close, it's kind of cheating. So how about like 5, 7 something? But I'm just one man, and this is the point of the episode, that I turn around to you guys to opine in the comments below, or via our social media, MotoManTV, all one word, MotoManTV, all one word, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. And with that, if you got value out of this episode, I would greatly appreciate you sharing them with all your friends on your socials. And one more point, it was great to be back in my hometown, even for a short period of time. Until I see you in the next episode, bis später.